everyone, and welcome to this month's SANS Threat Analysis Rundown live stream. I'm Katie Nichols, so excited to be here with you today. I'm an instructor for Forensics 578 Cyber Threat Intelligence. Happy December 19th. Anything like me, you are looking forward to the holidays. But of course, before we get to the holidays, we got a live stream to do. Really excited today to be joined by all of you around the world. If you have a minute, let us know where you're coming in from. Got a marriage proposal to kick off. Sorry, I'm happily married, but thank you. Where in the world are you coming from, and what role are you? Today, we're going to take a tangent, maybe an adjacent field to threat intelligence. We're going to be talking about threat hunting. And with that, I'm excited to be joined by my guests today, three folks that I've known for a while, the recent Difference Maker Award winners from Sunday. Please join me in welcoming three members of the Splunk Surge team, David Bianco, Dr. Ryan Fetterman, and Sydney Maroney. Welcome to you all. As I said, congratulations on your SANS Difference Maker Award from Sunday night. Let's kick off, and would just love for you to tell the audience who you are, a little bit about your background. David, start with you. Welcome.
Oh, sure. Thanks for having me. So my name is David Bianco. As Katie said, I work for the Splunk Surge cybersecurity research team. I guess a little bit about me. I've been involved in threat hunting for a long time and been in cybersecurity for even much longer. I've been doing this for, let's just say, roughly 30 years-ish. But I don't know what to say about myself. That's the best thing to say about myself, is I'm terrible about talking about myself. You might know me from some of my previous works. I'm Troy McClure. You might know me from some of my previous works, the Pyramid of Pain, the Squirrel threat hunting architecture, and now the lead author of the Peak threat hunting framework, along with Ryan and Sydney.
Awesome. Thanks, David. I like that. I'm not good at introducing myself. That was a great introduction, though. Ryan, you want to go next?
Sure. Good afternoon. My name is Ryan Fetterman. I'm a researcher with the Surge team for a little over 2 years now. Also happily married, for anyone in the chat wondering. Prior to that, spent most of my time in U.S. government circles, mostly at MITRE, where I led our cyber analytics capabilities and worked mostly on threat hunting, data analysis, and other defensive cyber ops problems for our sponsors.
Yeah, and I should disclose, Ryan and I used to work together at MITRE. So always fun to connect again with former MITRE colleagues. And last but not least, Sydney, who I had the pleasure to just meet in person on Sunday. Love for you to introduce yourself.
Yeah, thanks for having us, Katie. So my name is Sydney Maroney. I'm a principal threat hunter at Splunk. Technically, I'm not on the Surge team, but I am part of the Surge cohort, which is a really cool group of folks at Splunk who are very security-minded, that get to work very closely on all the Surge projects and initiatives that they're doing. So I get to work with David and Ryan all the time, and I love it. I've been in security for about 10 years, and half of those I've spent full-time threat hunting. Other than that, I've done incident response, forensics, automation, a little bit of everything on the blue side.
Excellent. Thanks for noting. I think of Surge as it's a mindset. Not
It really is. Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And I see we have folks joining us from around the world. We got Boston, Massachusetts. We got the DC, Maryland, Virginia area, Miami, Florida. We have someone from Belgium and Texas. Exciting. Abu Dhabi. Excellent. So we got folks from around the world. Always love to hear that. And we got some threat intel analysts. If we have any hunters out there listening, would love to hear from you as well. That's our topic today. And we have our first mention of the term thrunting. So thank you for that. How does your team feel about the term thrunting? Are we pro or con?
We're mixed.
Mixed. Okay. That's very diplomatic.
I've made lots of stickers and merch with the word thrunting on it. So
there we go.
I'm a proponent.
You're pro thrunting, and David maybe will reserve judgment. Well, let's dive in. So I will fully admit that I watch y'all's work. I saw the peak threat hunting framework come out. This has been out for over a year, and I skimmed it when it came out, but I haven't dove in other than preparing for today. And so maybe to start, for those who have never seen peak before, never heard of it, what is it? Let's start there.
Well, I guess the best way to think about that is to start about thinking about what is threat hunting, because we kind of use the word threat hunting in a lot of senses. Some senses are actually what I think of more traditional CTI kind of uses of that term. For this purpose, in fact, if you actually read the framework document, I think we actually use almost these same words. We're talking about the manual or maybe semi-automated but human-driven process of trying to find security incidents that all of your automated detections missed. And the threat hunting framework, I mean, people have been doing threat hunting for, I mean, it's been a big thing for like 10 years now, and it's older than that even. But for a long time, there was not a lot of guidance about what it is or how to do it well. And around 2015, 2016, a few different frameworks got published that tried to start that process of like, here's what we, consider the best practices in threat hunting, and here's how you do it. We started the peak threat hunting framework back in 2023 is when we started conceptualizing it and put it together, because it had been, I think by that time it was like 8 or 9 years since the last one of those frameworks had been published. And if you think of 8 or 9 years in the security industry, that's just an incredibly long time. And we learned a lot about threat hunting since then. So we got together and we kind of put down what we considered a more modernized version of the threat hunting processes and the things that go along with it. So we defined 3 different types of threat hunts that you could do. Everyone probably knows the hypothesis-driven threat hunting. That's by far the most popular and probably what most people think of when they think of threat hunting. But we also talk a lot about baseline threat hunting. So like finding what is normal so that you can find significant deviations that might indicate security concerns. And also something that I'm going to leave to Ryan to talk a little bit more about in a few minutes, but what we call model-assisted threat hunting, or the application of machine learning and maybe now artificial intelligence kind of concepts into threat hunting as well. But we also provide other things too in ours. It's not just like, how do you do the data analysis part? We talk a lot about how the structure of a threat hunting operation works, the preparation phase, the execution phase, and the final phase, which is acting. It's like to create an impact of your hunt on your security program somehow. That's why we actually call it PEAK. The prepare, execute, and act with knowledge is actually the name of it, because each of those phases incorporates knowledge in some way, either inputting knowledge, outputting, creating knowledge, or spreading knowledge around the organization. But you'll also find things like we have guidance on how to create good automated detections from your threat hunts and move them into production use. We have something that I'll let Sydney talk a little bit more about in a little bit as well. What are the expected outputs of a typical threat hunt? Like, what should you be producing? One of the things that I find really interesting about it, and I never would have guessed this a few years ago, is the metrics, the hunting metrics that we defined. Because for 10 years, people have been asking me, how do you put metrics and measure success around threat hunts? And I never had a good answer until PEAK. So we have a lot of different things in there. So it's not just like the technical how to do the data analysis, but it's really lots of other things that go along with it to help you structure your threat hunting program so that you can do more and more effective threat hunting.
Nice. I like what you said. I think, I was thinking, okay, yeah, like there are other frameworks, and yes, there are, but I think it's important to acknowledge things are always changing. And I'm excited, a few minutes to dive in with Ryan on the math part. Great acronym as well. But yeah, I can imagine machine learning, AI are sort of changing things. And so updating our frameworks and our knowledge, probably important there. So I think a few directions we could go. Let's start with everyone's favorite topic of metrics. I don't know. We have this in 578, and I'm always like, okay, everyone, it's right after lunch and it's metrics time. But I don't know. I think good metrics are powerful because, right, as a team lead, I think it's the ability to show the impact, right? What your team has done. And same thing with threat hunting. I think that, we often think about like, okay, if we find an actual adversary, that's success. But I think it's more complicated than this. So Sydney, I would love for you to talk to us about why metrics are great and how Peak can help here.
Sure. So metrics are how you show your value to the organization. So if you want to keep your team and grow your team, you need to be showing what impact you are making. And metrics are a challenge, like you mentioned, Katie. It's always a bit of a hurdle perfecting them, and every organization is different. So you might go to one organization and you realize that a metric is better than another one. But we've laid out a few of the top ones, and they're very straightforward. A lot of them are related to like the key deliverables that you would have as outcomes of your hunt, like detections, incidents, of course, but also other pieces of knowledge that we may have gained as we are hunting. So there's lots of opportunity here.
Nice. And I will attest, right? My team at Red Canary, my day job, like we use some of these, right? How many threats have we actually identified? But I like that this is one that I think a lot of people tend to overlook. Like, even if you don't find a threat, if you find some misconfiguration, like that shouldn't be open to the internet, that's really valuable too. So I'm really glad to see that. And gaps, right? Anything weird, or maybe we didn't have the data to run this hunt. That's important too. I feel like sometimes people, if you try to hunt and you don't find a real adversary, you feel like you failed.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. Like, we don't control the timing of what the adversaries are doing and if they're doing it during our hunting window, right? So we have to get past, like, probably the original metric for threat hunting is how many incidents did you open? Mm-hmm. We have to get past that. One of the interesting things, and I think the reason that so many people didn't know about how to do metrics for threat hunting for such a long time was that we thought of the reason for threat hunting incorrectly. Like I said, what threat hunting is, figuring out how to find new incidents that we missed with our automated detections, but that's not the reason you do threat hunting. Like I often say we kind of went through 3 stages. In the first stage, hey, we're threat hunting to find new incidents. That was, let's say, almost like the prehistory of threat hunting by this point. It was a while ago. But starting with those 2015, 2016 kind of frameworks, we started seeing people more talking about the point of threat hunting. The reason that you did it was to not just find those incidents, but find better ways to find them automatically, because you need that automation to scale against the threats and the size of our organizations, right? But still, that left us with a metrics question. How do we show, if purpose of it is to basically do detection, research, and development, how do we show how we've been doing? And you could add a couple things like how many new detections did you make, or how many existing detections did you update? But really, when we started putting together Peak, one of the key things that we thought of was the reason for threat hunting has evolved, or maybe we've just figured it out better than we figured it out before. And it is not just to find incidents. It is not just to drive detection improvements. We think of Peak as driving, or we think of threat hunting as driving improvement across your entire security program. So like you said, when you find misconfigurations, you find data that's missing, or almost anything you find, it's an opportunity for improvement. So a lot of our metrics, we build upon the traditional ones. So for example, the number of detections that you made or improved, but also and the number of incidents that you open during the hunt, but also the number of incidents that you open later after the hunt, like in the future, as a result of those new or improved detections, because you would not have probably found them had you not hunted for them like 6 months ago.
That's interesting. So not just like how many incidents now, but like in the future, if you create a new detection analytic, you can then take credit for any other incidents. And I like the way you phrase it in here, driving continuous security improvement. We have a comment, someone saying that, are you threat hunting for something you think should be rare? You either win, you find threats, or you learn more about your environment. Win-win. Yeah. Continuous security improvement. And Ryan, would love to invite you to jump in here. I know you're going to jump in. What are your thoughts on metrics?
Yeah, David captured a lot of it, but I just was going to point out that, harking back to 10 years ago when threat hunting was kind of emerging, it was mostly seen as an advanced function and something that a lot of SOC teams weren't going to do until they were at a high level of maturity. And I think over time, and with this change in what we want to emphasize, we're essentially lining threat hunting up as more of a core function for continuously improving a lot of our defenses.
Yeah, that's a great point. And, one of the things I always like to ask, we have a lot of different types of IT security professionals, people who are learning, right? Like I can absolutely see if you're creating a threat hunting team, how you would use this. What about if you're like a single IT admin, right? Or someone who's starting to realize like, hey, as Ryan, as you said, that threat hunting should be part of my security program, but I don't have a team. Like, where would you recommend someone like that starts with using Peak?
So the last section in the Peak framework document actually talks about how to adopt it if you either don't have a threat hunting program or you have any kind of existing threat hunting program. And I guess I would say the answer is kind of similar in both situations, but the key difference is if you already have anything going, you don't have to like forklift everything into Peak all at once. We designed it so that you could adopt pieces of it that make sense for you. And if there's pieces that don't make sense, you could modify them or just leave them out entirely. So it's adaptable. So just pick something, one piece of the framework. I often recommend either start with metrics because they tell the impact of what you have done, and that makes it easier for you to go to your leadership and say, this is why we're spending the resources and time to do threat hunting, and this is the return that we're getting on it. Look how much better we've made security across the organization, not just the incidents that we've opened.
And actually, you mentioned time. We've had a question come in from David. Can you talk about the length of time for each hunt, in the relation to metrics? And I think this is a great question. I don't know. Sometimes I've seen teams struggle with this. Like, should we spend 2 weeks on a hunt? Should we spend 2 hours on a hunt? So I'm curious what you all think about that question of like, how much time, or how do we track time?
I think as part of the planning for the hunt, that preparation phase in Peak, you can, after you do your research and you kind of have an idea of how big of a research question this is going to be for you, how big of a project, you can usually allocate it. Like I've worked in hunt teams where we said, for example, not that this is a magic number, but most hunts will take 1 week. But in that planning phase, if you need to take longer, or if you don't have enough work to fill a week, that's fine. You just note that and say, well, by the end of the preparation phase, we've decided as part of our plan that we're going to spend 2 weeks, or this is only going to take us probably 2 days. It might change as you get through it, but that's life. And maybe Sydney has something to say too, because she uses Peak for hunt operations all the time.
I will start off with the analyst answer. It depends.
Of
But
course.
I would say scoping, like David mentioned, is huge, like in that prepare phase. But also once you get to the execute phase of your hunt and you're looking at the data, sometimes you realize that you scoped wrong and you have too much data for your current scope, and you have to go back and reevaluate that hypothesis and adjust it a little bit. Like that is perfectly okay, and that actually happens more often than not when we are threat hunting. And that could help you scope down if you're trying to minimize the time for your threat hunts. If you feel like they're taking, several months and you want them to be maybe 2 weeks, that could be like a good opportunity to say pivot where you, instead of looking at all the environments, maybe you're just looking at one environment. Maybe you're just looking at one type of operating system. There's a lot of ways we could go about scoping to try to make the hunt a little smaller, to minimize the time if we need to. And then just the rest of the scope that we pushed out, put it as another hunt idea and do that next.
Nice. We had another question come in. I love when we get lots of questions. Keep them coming. So someone asking about dealing with the findings, right? So I see you talk about the steps, document your findings, right? If there, for example, is a misconfiguration. So question being, when the hunt team finds something like a misconfiguration, to what extent do they manage that remediation process, right? Like the hunt team could fully own it, or do they document it and throw it over the fence? And that's a tough one. I'm curious in your experiences, like what have you found works here?
It probably depends on your organization, but like a fairly large style or even medium-sized organization, the hunt team is probably not remediating anything. They're not fixing things. And that's fine. Actually, if you look at the metrics, we talk about the number of things that you've reported. And I encourage teams to also track the number of things that eventually got fixed, not that they fixed them. And the reason is you talk about the potential for impact with the number of things that you've reported, and then the actual impact when they get fixed. Also, if there's a giant disparity between those two numbers, that's useful information for your hunt team because it might indicate, it could indicate a number of things. But for example, maybe your relationship with those teams that is you're reporting things to could be better. But it's really nice when you can say things like, we reported 12 opportunities for improvement last month, 8 of which have already been remediated.
Nice. I think I love, and you called out right there. It's like you anticipated this question, like both the number reported and the number closed, then you can really make a compelling case for driving security improvements. So
yeah, it's almost like I actually have used Peak.
Weird. Using
it is actually
created. I don't know.
I will tell you though, before the Peak framework existed, all these things were based on things that either we've done doing threat hunting or we've observed other teams doing. So we didn't just make all these up. That particular kind of thing was actually something that we tracked at a previous hunt team.
Yeah, you can often tell when frameworks are inspired by people who've done the work versus in an ivory tower academic. So clearly this one inspired by work that you all have actually done, which is cool. Let's see, we have more questions. Yay. APT, if we're having a threat bingo card, we have APT, we had threating. So should evidence of the threat level of the threat actor change the approach, the average, right? If it's an APT or let's say ransomware or right, whatever is a priority threat for you, how do you think about like changing that prioritization? Should that factor in?
I mean, I think if you've found evidence that the threat actor is active in your network, you may no longer be doing a threat hunt.
Yeah.
So, but probably yes. I don't know what Sydney or Ryan, if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, kick off your incident response procedures. If you've found something that you're linking to an APT and take it from there, you obviously want to apply all the sensitivities required when you're working with an advanced actor. You don't want to do anything to tip them off that you may be onto them and things like that. So hopefully you have an incident response plan and you can kind of bring more people into the fold for sure.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the cool things maybe about if you have a threat hunting team or you're doing this, it's an opportunity to work with like everyone across the organization, right? To deal with those misconfigurations or to pass off if you find an incident. I was also thinking, and I went to the prepare section, right? If you actually find, during your hunt, an actual threat, moving to incident response, but I think even as you prepare and selecting topics or researching, right? Like thinking about how important is this, and you're not going to be able to hunt for everything if you're doing hypothesis-driven hunts. So prioritizing there as well. Excellent.
Yeah, I mean, definitely prioritizing based on intel that you have. Like I have always thought of the core, like SOC kind of things a little bit more than just the analyst. It's a pipeline almost that starts with CTI and then goes through detection engineering and maybe threat hunting in parallel, through that to deploying a automated detection, and then into what most people think of as the traditional SOC, and then incident detection, incident response, digital forensics, that lessons learned kind of reporting phase at the end, and then wraps around back into CTI too. But we definitely prefer to see people do the intel-led approach rather than just being like, I'm going to pick a random MITRE attack technique and start hunting it. I mean, maybe that works sometimes too. There's a place for that, but intel driven usually.
Yeah, Sydney.
And it's also important to hunt or look at what's affecting your organization. If your organization doesn't have a certain OS in their environment, we probably shouldn't be looking at those threats. Or if there's a threat actor that's targeting retail and we are an ISP, probably not worth looking at. So those are things that we want to keep in mind too as we are doing research and looking at intel and determining what we want to hunt.
Doing some threat modeling. And so you've mentioned threat modeling, and you've also said it depends. So we're basically best friends. Those are my favorite topics. Well, yeah, as a threat intel person, I often focus on kind of the intel driven, the hypothesis based hunts. But I find it really interesting. We have model assisted threat hunts, which honestly is an area that I'm not as strong in. And this is why I'm glad we have folks like Ryan. We got data people. I have a data person on my team. And so I would love to spend a little time, Ryan, diving into math, which again, good acronym is key to a good framework, right? So model assisted threat hunting. I'm curious, why do you all feel like this was important to add into the framework, Ryan? And tell us a little bit more about the math aspect of this.
Sure. So I think it was important to add into the framework because it's something that people have definitely been doing for some time, but it hasn't really been formalized or standardized in any kind of way that is required to kind of make sure we can do it correctly and keep evolving it going forward. So this was our attempt to capture that. And this is something that I've been working on personally for quite some time, even ideas about this back at MITRE. But we really define the model assisted threat hunting as using algorithms to find leads for threat hunting. And that's purposefully broad in a number of ways because algorithms can capture a lot of different data science or machine learning methods. And then leads in that sentence can refer to multiple items of interest because, as we said, we're not just interested in finding incidents as we've discussed in metrics. And the core of this idea really comes from what I think is often a misalignment for the way we approach most machine learning problems in security, which is that we're focused primarily on detection first. And by detection, I mean kind of like an always on analytic that we're trying to detect something with high confidence and do it continuously. And that's obviously very beneficial when it's done right. But I think there's a lot of problems you have to account for this to be correct. First of all, you need the right data, you need the right amount of data, you need the time to develop your approach. You have to have the cost to support those aforementioned things. You have to pay for infrastructure, and then you're invested in maintaining that approach as the problem or the underlying data you used may drift over time. So what I wanted to capture here is really a broader array of problems where we can apply these data science methods, but not typically or primarily with the aim of maintaining a long-term machine learning detection, but rather as a means to kind of take a tough problem and make it more approachable, or as a means to take a creative path that might help us lead to like a novel result.
Interesting. I hadn't really thought about that before. Yeah, as you're trying to do like detection engineering, trying to organize your data, process it, standardize it, et cetera, it's a lot. And so hunting, you have a little more freedom, right? You can just kind of look at it for interesting things, and you don't have to think about long-term detection. Like maybe it goes that direction as we talked about metrics and outcomes. But I hadn't really thought of that. I was focusing in on the algorithms, and as a non-data science person, I really like how clean this is, right? These are like, I can understand these terms like classification, clustering, time series. So I don't know, I found some of the helpful part of frameworks like these are just getting your head around the problem, especially as a non-expert in this area. I'm curious, out of like these algorithms, like, are there any that, Ryan, you think are particularly effective? Or like if someone wants to get started with a math style approach, what would be most accessible, or where do you think like the best return on investment might be?
Yeah, it's a tough question. It's definitely problem specific, and I think we have a couple like flow charts to kind of help guide your thinking in terms of what's going to be the best threat hunting approach for the problem you're taking. And something I'll talk a little bit more about in a second is trying to figure out what analysis method fits your problem. So kind of the traditional example is like training a classifier to identify something based on examples of malicious behavior that you already have. So we've done an example with that around like dictionary-based domain generation algorithms. But then we have another one that doesn't require any aforementioned data. So another example we did was basically taking text data, which is very common in security, and vectorizing it, which means to encode it in like a numerical representation, because then we can do all kinds of interesting things with the data, like visualize it. We do three-dimensional space in the example, but then you can kind of statistically measure or mathematically measure the difference between two strings, for example, once you have them encoded. So there's really a lot of possibilities here, and we recognize that can be intimidating. This is definitely a tough hunt to kind of break into. So what we're doing is taking an approach to build out a lot more of these examples, or showcasing methods where these kind of approaches are being used. We're developing training, and then we're also actually working on a book that tries to put some structure around more of the analysis approaches and explain this in kind of a fun way.
Nice. Sydney, do you want to jump in?
Sure. Ryan and I have been talking a lot about math in the past year because I'm not a data scientist. This is not my background. I'm security background, so I know threat hunting. So trying to make this more approachable has been something I've really been trying to work on and bring to my team so we can bring to others. But it is challenging. It's very advanced method. It isn't something I would start off with. There's a little programming knowledge needed, the knowledge of algorithms. One thing that we have used quite a bit is Splunk has an app called the MLTK app, which is Machine Learning Toolkit. It's free. It plugs on top of Splunk, and it has a ton of walkthroughs that you can use to do to apply algorithms to your data sets, which I think is an easier approach than, say, jumping in a Python or jumping in a Jupyter notebook and running some Python if that's not your background.
Awesome. Thank you. And we'll drop a link into MLTK. It's always nice to have a starting point if you're like, I have no idea what I'm doing here.
Yes.
We had another great question coming in from Andrew about anomalies. And this is a tough one, right? Right. Algorithm type anomaly detection. Like, some of these algorithms are great at detecting anomalies, but how do you deal with benign sources? Like a vulnerability scanner might be an anomaly, or like someone downloading a bunch of cat GIFs might be an anomaly, but it's not bad. How do you handle the anomaly thing?
I mean, probably the way that all of your other security tools do that. You usually have a whitelist, right? And you say, like, I'm looking for exploit attempts or successful exploits, right? But your vulnerability scanners create those all the time. So your automated detection, like your SIM or your IDS or whatever, probably has a whitelisting for the things that originate with the vulnerability scanners. We as threat hunters can usually get access to those kinds of whitelists and apply them to almost like as filters or data enrichment layer when we're doing our threat hunts. Like, oh, we have a finding. Good that we validated our analysis, but it's a known benign positive.
It's funny. A question just came in. Would you call the anomaly a false positive? And David, my colleague Jason, credit to him, he's recently educated me on this term, benign true positive. Like, right. It's definitely an anomaly, or like sometimes we joke as an admin or adversary, like it definitely looks weird. So it's truly weird, but it's benign. So yeah, benign true positive. I don't know. It is tough though. And that's one of the challenges. I mean, I think my teams face, and you all probably face with hunting, is like, sometimes we're going to find things that are just weird. And like, I don't know, like we talked about this earlier with the different outcomes, but like just finding anomalies, like, is that success in hunting? I don't know.
Okay, I will tell you. Perfect timing to bring up this topic, because as a security analyst, like a SOC analyst or a new threat hunter or anything, anytime you start looking at something you never looked before, everything looks weird. I don't want to say drones in the sky in New Jersey, but drones in the sky in New Jersey might be an example of that.
Timely.
But it happens. We see it all the time. Like lots of people that are just new in the SOC or new to threat hunting, and they get all spun up like, I found a thing. And then they look at it and they're like, oh, but it's a true positive. So good. You proved that your approach finds the thing, but it's a known true positive that's benign. And then, so it's just because you didn't know about it. That's one of the reasons why we have this idea of the third hunting type, the baseline hunt, because you have to get familiar with the data set and the technology and the environment that you're hunting in, so that you can know what truly is normal and start creating that list of benign true positives, especially if you never hunted in that environment before. You'll need to do that.
Interesting. Do you think that like the baseline threat hunting, would you want to do that before math, or can you mix and match?
So Ryan actually created that nice little flow chart. And if you look at the flow chart carefully, you'll see that one of the things that, if you've never worked in this environment, you're not familiar with this data, you actually have a choice of, you could do baseline hunting or you could do math, because we think of math as kind of a hybrid between baselining and hypothesis-based hunting. So you actually get your choice. I usually prefer the baseline hunting just to start off with, because one of the set of outputs for that is a good baseline of what is normal, and that's useful to everybody, not just the threat hunting team, but like the SOC analysts that are doing alert triage and incident investigations, and the digital forensics people who are digging really deep into security incidents. They also need to know what is normal in that environment so they can differentiate benign and malicious positives as well. So it gives you a way to generate good documentation on normal operations when you just started in that environment. So usually baselining, but you don't always have to start there.
It depends. Good answer for everything.
Right. It depends. That's this entire framework document is just like, here's how we think, but it depends.
We had a question come in about real world examples of using Peak. And Sydney, I might turn to you. Sounds like you've used this internally. So any examples come to mind?
So we're on the topic of baseline threat hunting, and at Splunk, we have a lot of data sources. We're fortunate enough to capture almost all the things. So a lot of times we will have new data from a tool being sent to Splunk, and we won't be monitoring it, or we might like have a little bit of monitoring, but still there's a lot more opportunity with it. So this is the case where we can do a baseline hunt, and we can see what's normal in this environment. What do the fields look like? What are fields of value that we could really dig into and see if we can find anything interesting? And then, as David mentioned, documenting. So that's that knowledge piece of Peak, like really sharing it out with others so that they can get the benefit from the hunt, not just the hunter. Like that is, again, where you show that impact.
Gotcha. We had a question come in from someone who's either a fellow SANS instructor or pretending to be a fellow SANS instructor, John Hubbard, asking any thoughts on a good way to format that baseline info so SOC analysts and hunters can easily read, reference, use it on a day-to-day basis. That's a tough one. Any thoughts on that challenging question from John?
I mean, you can't go wrong usually with plain text. Just like maybe a one-page document that just says, here's what we found. And then like what we've done in the past is like, here's a list of all of the known anomalies, and that we say that they're fine. These are the benign anomalies that you could expect to find. But also, like, we have a workshop that we do to teach Peak to our Splunk customers. And one of the things that we talk about is how to create like statistical summaries of data. So you could go column by column and say, like, for this, like, I don't know, usernames or login times or something like that. You know, these are the typical things that we see: 25, 50, 75 percentile marks, or when they're appropriate. And that allows you to be able to calculate like true outliers based on the percentiles numbers that you see. So how you write it down is definitely up to your organization. There's no one format that's right or better. But as long as you are writing it down, and preferably consistently, like you don't document them two different baselines in wildly different styles.
Consistency, which I don't know, when many people are working on a problem, that's always tough, but it's a good thing to aim for. Sydney, do you have other thoughts on this?
We've implemented using a knowledge base a few years back. And so every hunt we do has a knowledge base article or maybe a multiple. And this is something where we capture, the what we hunted, what our monitoring looks like, maybe any suggestions or outcomes of that hunt. And then this is shared throughout our security organization. So the key stakeholders get it, and we make sure we raise it and share it via Slack or email, whatever we have. And honestly, you can do that in any tool you have available to you. You can use that, in Google Docs. You can do it in some sort of tracking tool like Jira, Jira or Confluence. There's like a lot of options. Just like use whatever tool is available to you. Just make sure you're documenting.
Yep. Document, be consistent. These are the things that it's always easy to say, like make sure you document everything. And then like you get done with a hunt and you don't want to write notes. Like that's hard, but important. Kind of a fun question coming in again from Andrew. I appreciate your questions, Andrew. In your experience, what are the most fruitful fields to vectorize or standardize, like user agent, domain, URL? And there's so many options. So I'm just going to open this up as like, what are your favorite fields for hunting and any data source? Do you have favorites? It's a tough question. It's like asking your favorite attack technique or something.
Well, we do have an example on user agent. I think anytime that you're looking for like those subtle distinctions between two strings and you want to assess not only difference but similarity, those are the kind of problems that you want to look at. We also actually did a pretty interesting example with browser extensions on the Chrome Web Store, where we weren't just looking at the text fields, but we actually included like the icons of the browser extension. So if you take something like a browser extension and you hash it, now you have like a text-based representation of something that's actually a graphic. You can vectorize the hash then, and then you can compare the vectors of the hashes. So that was kind of another creative approach that we took to combine kind of multiple characteristics of something. So in that case, the example was looking for masquerading. So if we look at elements like the name of the extension, the description of the extension, which are both text-based, and then we include something like the icon, which you would also want to make look similar if you were doing a masquerading approach, we could hash and vectorize that, combine all those details together, and then we did a comparison to see could we isolate the next, n most similar extensions to our target. So there's a post about that too, and I actually talked about that at InfoSec Jupiter-thon about this time last year, I think.
Nice. We'll try to grab that link, or if you have it, Ryan, we can share it because that sounds like a cool one. So David, Sydney, other favorite fields for hunting?
Yeah, I don't know about fields because it depends what I want to hunt for. But I will say, if you drop me into a new environment that I've never worked in before, and you're like, just go out and find bad things, which, by the way, terrible strategy, but it happens, right? So I would probably say I like to start personally with DNS traffic, because the records of what systems you're trying to contact on the internet span the entire kill chain almost. And so you have not a lot of detail necessarily, but you have a very rich source of data to see, like, hey, which systems are trying to connect it? Are there multiple, clients that are trying to talk to this thing? Is this maybe something that we already know about? Did it just start? Maybe you could do some data enrichment if you have like a domain tools subscription or something like that, so you can bring in registration dates for the domains or risk scoring, things like that. So DNS, for a similar reason, I kind of like web proxy data, because again, that's mostly a lot of it is toward the end of the kill chain there, but exploit as well phase. So you can kind of get a pretty good coverage just by looking at what people are trying to do on the internet or who they're trying to contact. After that, yeah, it just depends on what you're trying to hunt.
Nice. And I'm bringing up a couple different examples. Brian's dropping in links to his blog post. I like the Chrome extension one. I think some folks on my team at Red Canary have looked at like frequency of different extensions. So that's a cool one. The DNS, David saying DNS data is awesome, right? There's actually in the main Peak threat hunting framework ebook, example of hunting DNS exfiltration. So lots of examples here of different favorite fields, or you can't choose, right? Favorite data sources, perhaps. All right, let's see. Other questions? Just a comment. We need more public content on hunt documentation, known benigns, false positives. Yeah, totally agree. And now, luckily, you all have another RSS feed source to add to your feed, like the Splunk blog. So a bunch of resources talking about these things.
Yeah, one thing I'd love to mention is myself, Lauren Prail, and John Gregata just started a project. It's open source. It's on GitHub. It's called HERTH, or Hunting, Exchange, and Research Threat Hub. And we have posted it's basically a repository of hunt ideas. So, and it's tied to Peak, where we have our hypothesis driven, we have our baseline, and then we also have our machine model assisted threat hunting. So we have it broken out by that, and we just have a bunch of ideas incorporated in there. So you can go if you need an idea. It's not a detection repository, so there's no SPL or any KQL, whatever, but it's just for ideas, like if you need to get started.
I love it. And we'll drop a link into that one as well. I like, especially for people who are newer, like, I'm not sure. Yeah. Where do I start?
Yeah.
Having something like this is awesome. So a lot of, I see fire puns here. The name is Hearth, and I see alchemy, assets, embers, flames. I feel like y'all like puns. It's good.
You gotta have fun with it.
Nice. So yeah, just bringing that up. Hearth, another great resource, community-driven repository for ideas. All right, we have talked about so much. What else? What have we missed, Sydney, David, Ryan, about Peak that we haven't talked about yet?
That's a good question. I mean, I think there probably are parts of it that we haven't really done in detail, but there's only so much you could do in a 1 hour conversation, right? We have, I will say, the framework document itself, the official reference document, is a relatively short PDF. What is it, like 31 or 32 pages? So it's a quick read because there's a lot of white space on those pages and big graphics.
Not a quick read, David. Is 31 pages a quick read?
Yes. Yes, it is.
Fair enough.
But it's dense. I mean, it's quick, but information dense. So don't feel like you're going to get yourself into a 127-page document and wish that you had anything else that you should be doing. You could easily read this in an hour or so and get through it.
Yeah. And I was like, the table of contents, right? You can think about, okay, where do I want to jump? Or, right, adopting Peak. If you need to start there towards the end, how to adopt it. I appreciate that section, because sometimes, it can be overwhelming if you're newer. Like, how do I use this? So
there's a lot of pieces to it. And that table of contents that you just mentioned, remember I said you don't have to do everything all at once. You can just pick one, go through the table of contents and be like, which section sounds most interesting, and start reading there. You don't have to read it cover to cover. You can just be like, oh, I want to know more about the ABLE framework for testing my hunting hypotheses, or I would really like to drill down into those metrics.
Yep.
Whatever.
Nice. Really useful resource. So yeah, maybe 31 pages isn't too long and easy to jump around, nicely formatted. So a ton of info in this framework. Excellent. Well, thank you all for giving this overview. We dropped a link in so you can deep dive a little bit more, lots of other resources. As we get towards the top of the hour, would love to close, we're closing out 2024 calendar year. I don't know about you. I don't like when people are like, make a prediction for next year. So instead, I'd love to ask each of you, like, what makes you optimistic about 2025 for your team, for the cybersecurity community, as we close out? Sydney, would love to start with you.
Sure. So one of the things another thing I've been working on this year is taking the tools that we already have and making better use of them. So an example being like Splunk. You go in there and you use maybe a handful of commands, and really there's a lot more power in the tool. And we need to take advantage of those things. No matter what tool you have, it doesn't have to be Splunk. It can be anything you have at your company. When Ryan mentioned the book, and it's one that we've been working on, and it's going to be released next year, and it's going to have a lot of these commands and how to better use a tool like Splunk to do threat hunting.
Nice. better use the tools we have. Reason for optimism. And the book, optimistic about that too. Ryan, what are you optimistic about in 2025?
Yeah, just to describe the book a little bit more, we kind of see a gap in what we've created with Peak. When you go through the process, there's kind of a block that says analyze or do your analysis, and that's where I think there's room for people to get lost in figuring out what are those different methods that we should be thinking about. And if you're working in threat hunting, you've probably heard people talk about sorting and stacking, and we've talked about clustering and classification and all these ideas that are really analysis approaches. But what we wanted to do is put them into a structure that we can understand. We can teach people what the different categories are, how to apply them, and then even provide recipes for how to apply them to specific problems. So it's called the Threat Hunter's Cookbook, and it should be a fun kind of interesting way to learn about it and apply these things. But yeah, I'll be the AI guy. I think that there's a lot of promise and a lot that we can get out of even just the existing state of large language models in defensive cyber ops. And in my experience, I mean, a lot of the issue with SOC work is just like the cognitive load and the relentless amount of data and events coming in every second. And the LLM is like an analyst brain that just never gets tired. So I can see a lot of use cases for using it as a partner for analysis, making our incident reporting better and faster, enriching our events, helping us with classification, helping us summarize intel. So I think there's a lot of room for this to kind of be a boon for raising the floor for analysis in the SOC. And the research and accessibility of these models has really matured to the point that we can fully start building out these capabilities in 2025.
Nice. I like that. Reducing the mental load on analysts, maybe reducing burnout with AI. And David, we'll close with you. What do you think? What are you optimistic about in 2025?
So one thing to know about me is I'm always optimistic about security. So I'm a big fan of this idea called the attacker's dilemma. I don't know if everyone is familiar with that, but you always hear the defender's dilemma. Like the defenders have to get everything right all the time, and the attackers only need to get things right once, and then we're cooked, which is actually entirely untrue. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail here right now, but I think of it the opposite way. It's the defender or the attacker's dilemma. So the defenders have to get they have a lot of choices, a lot of options, and a lot of advantages that they can take advantage of. The attackers have to get everything right all the time, or we discover them and get a chance to remediate and potentially interdict before they get to the end of their kill chain and complete their attack. So I am always optimistic. I guess if one thing I could be optimistic about 2025 is I'm optimistic that more people might realize this and be able to find a way to take a break, just a short break, even from the operations and the information and the pressures that we are all under every day, and just kind of rethink, like, what are my actual advantages and how could I be smarter at taking advantage of some of those to bring pain to the adversary, make it harder for them, and increase their cost of operations against us.
I like it. Defenders having the advantage. My team always talks about detection opportunities. We have so many opportunities to catch these adversaries, and it's a great point. And mine, I think, is I am optimistic about just the community sharing. I think Peak is a great example of this. Folks releasing all of their work, right? Sydney, the GitHub repository you shared, Hearth, right? There are a lot of people out there like you all, many others who care about helping each other to try to bring the pain to the adversaries. So I'm optimistic about that continuing.
That is the entire reason we wanted to write Peak. And we haven't mentioned this. We all work for Splunk, but we intentionally created the Peak threat hunting framework to be not product oriented, not technology oriented, so that everyone, Splunk customers or not, could use the framework to improve their threat hunting operations, because it was just our team's way of giving back to the community.
That's awesome. Love to see that. Reason for optimism indeed. Well, with that, we're going to start to close things out today on that theme of sharing, knowledge sharing. As you're looking to 2025, one thing we wanted to highlight, SANS Cyber Threat Intelligence Summit. I'm co-chairing, David's teaching after it. This is coming up the end of January, which is almost a month away. Can't believe it. It is totally free, live online, January 27th to 28th. Go ahead, sign up today. It's going to be awesome. And if you want to learn about advanced network forensics, David's teaching afterwards too. With that, thank you all so much for joining us today. I also wanted to give a special shout out to Stephen Hart behind the scenes. This is the last live stream for STAR he's going to be doing. So thank you. You don't even see him, but he's behind the scenes, sharing links, commenting, all of that. And a special thanks to my guests from Splunk today, David Bianco, Sydney Maroney, Dr. Ryan Fetterman, sharing the peak threat hunting framework. And of course, thank you to all of you for joining. What a great discussion today. I really am optimistic about the state of security in 2025. As long as we all keep sharing all of the knowledge, we're going to bring the pain to the adversaries rather. With that, that's all we have for today. Thank you so much for joining us here on STAR. I'm Katie Nichols. Have a happy, healthy holiday and a wonderful new year. See you in 2025.